The history of the family is a branch of social history that concerns the sociocultural evolution of kinship groups from prehistoric to modern times. The family has a universal and basic role in all societies. Research on the history of the family crosses disciplines and cultures, aiming to understand the structure and function of a family from many viewpoints. For example, sociological, ecological, or economical perspectives are used to view the interrelationships between individuals, the relatives, and the historical time. The study of family history has shown that family systems are flexible, culturally diverse, and adaptive to ecological and economical conditions. Definition of family. Co-residence and organization by kinship are both integral in the development of the concept of the family. A co-residential group that makes up a household may share general survival goals and a residence, but may not fulfill the varied and sometimes ambiguous requirements for definition as a family. Historiography. The history of the family emerged as a separate field of history in the 1970s, with close ties to anthropology and sociology. The trend was especially pronounced in the US and Canada. It emphasizes demographic patterns and public policy. It is quite separate from genealogy, though often drawing on the same primary source such as censuses and family records. An influential pioneering study, Women, Work, and Family, came in 1978. The authors, Louisa Tilley and Joan W. Scott, broke new ground with a broad interpretive framework and emphasis on the variable factors shaping women's place in the family and economy in France and England. It considered the interaction of production and reproduction in analysis of women's wage labor and thus helped to bring together labor and family history. Much work has been done on the dichotomy in women's lives between the private sphere and the public. For a recent worldwide overview covering 7,000 years, see Maines and Waltner. History of childhood. The history of childhood is a growing subfield. Family history science. Early scholars of family history applied Darwin's biological theory of evolution in the theory of the evolution of family systems. American anthropologist Lewis H. Morgan published Ancient Society in 1877, based on his theory of the three stages of human progress from savagery through barbarism to civilization. Morgan's book was the inspiration for Friedrich Engels' book, The Origin of the Family, Private Property and the State, published in 1884. Engels expanded Morgan's hypothesis that economic factors caused the transformation of primitive community into a class-divided society. Engels' theory of resource control, and later that of Karl Marx, was used to explain the cause and effect of change in family structure and function. The popularity of this theory was largely unmatched until the 1980s, when other sociological theories, particularly structural functionalism, gained acceptance. The book, Centuries of Childhood by Philippe Aries, published in France in 1960, had a great influence on the revival of the field of family history studies. Aries used the analysis of demographic data to draw the conclusion that the concept of childhood was a concept that emerged in modern nuclear families research methodology. Since the early 20th century, scholars have begun to unify methods of gathering data. One notable book by W.I. Thomas and Florian Znieniecki, Polish peasant in Europe and America, was influential in establishing the precedents of systematic longitudinal data analysis, gathering church files, court records, letters, architectural and archaeological evidence, art and iconography, and food and material culture. Increased the objectivity and reproducibility of family reconstruction studies. Studies of current family systems additionally employ qualitative observations, interviews and focus groups, and quantitative surveys. Family of origin. In most cultures of the world, the beginning of family history is set in creation myths. In Works and Days, the ancient Greek poet Hesiod describes the epic destruction of 4 previous ages of man. The utopia that was the Golden Age was eventually replaced by the current Iron Age, a time when gods made man live in hopeless misery and toil. Hesiod's second poem, Theogony, described the Greek gods' relationships and family ties. Ancient Greeks believed that among them were descendants of gods who qualified for priesthood or other privileged social status. The Judeo-Christian tradition originates in the Bible's book of Genesis. The first man and woman created by God gave rise to all of humanity. The Bible reflects the patriarchal worldview and often refers to the practice of polygamy, a common marital practice in ancient times. In biblical times, men sought to prove the descent from the family of the prophet Moses in order to be accepted into the priesthood. Roman families would include everyone within a household under the authoritarian role of the father, the paterfamilias. This included grown children and the slaves of the household. Children born outside of marriage, from common and legal concubinage, could not inherit the father's property or name. Instead, they belonged within the social group and family of the mothers. Most ancient cultures, like those of Assyria, Egypt and China, kept records of successes in the ruling dynasties to legitimize the power as divine in origin. Both the Inca king and the Egyptian pharaoh claimed that they were direct descendants of the sun god. Many cultures, such as the Inca of South America, the Kinte of Africa, and the Maori of New Zealand, did not have a written language and kept the history of their descent as an oral tradition. Many cultures used other symbols to document the history of descent. The totem poles of indigenous people of the Pacific Northwest were the symbolic representation of their ancestors and a family identity. In addition to being tied with the spiritual world, European nobility had long and well-documented kinship relationships, sometimes taking the roots in the Middle Ages. In 1538, King Henry VIII of England mandated that churches begin the record-keeping practice that soon spread throughout Europe. Britain's Domesday Book from 1086 is one of the oldest European genealogy records. In ancient and medieval times, the history of one's ancestors guaranteed religious and secular prestige. In 1632, Virginia was the first state in the New World mandating civil law that christenings, marriages and burials were to be recorded. Some modern Americans of European descent belong to organizations for early immigrants to the United States, like the National Society of Old Plymouth Colony descendants, the Society of Mayflower descendants, Daughters of the American Revolution, National Society Sons of the American Revolution, and Society of the Descendants of the Founding Fathers of New England. Evolution of household. The organization of the pre-industrial family is now believed to be similar to modern types of family. Many sociologists used to believe that the nuclear family was the product of industrialization, but evidence highlighted by historian Peter Laslett suggests that the causality is reversed, and that industrialization was so effective in northwestern Europe specifically because the pre-existence of the nuclear family fostered its development. Family types of pre-industrial Europe belonged into 2 basic groups: the simple household system and the joint family system. A simple household system featured a relatively late age of marriage for both men and women, and the establishment of separate household after the marriage and neolocality. A joint family household system was characterized by earlier marriage for women, co-residence with the husband's family of patrilocality, and co-residing of multiple generations. Many households consisted of unrelated servants and apprentices residing for periods of years and at the time belonging to the family. Due to shorter life expectancy and high mortality rates in the pre-industrialized world. Much of the structure of a family depended on the average age of the marriage of women. Late marriages, as occurred in the simple household system, left little time for three-generation families to form. Conversely, in the joint family household system, early marriages allowed for multi-generational families to form. The pre-industrial family had many functions. These included food production, land holding, regulation of inheritance, reproduction, socialization and education of its members. External roles allowed for participation in religion and politics. Social status was also strictly connected to one's family. Additionally, in the absence of government institutions, the family was the only resource to cope with sickness and aging. Because of the Industrial Revolution and new work and living conditions, families changed, transferring to public institutions responsibility for food production and the education and welfare of its aging and sick members. Post-industrial families became more private, nuclear, domestic and based on the emotional bonding between husband and wife, and between parents and children. Historian Lawrence Stone identifies three major types of family structure. In about 1450 to 1630, the open lineage family dominated. The Renaissance era, 1550 to 1700, brought the restricted patriarchal nuclear family. The early modern world, 1640 to 1800, emphasized the closed domesticated nuclear family.